Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Professor Nastaran Kherad. She is Associate Professor of Middle Eastern Studies at University of Montana. She received her PhD from University of Texas at Austin with a dissertation she wrote on the contemporary Iranian writer Ahmad Mahmoud. Her thesis title was Re-examining the Works of Ahmad Mahmoud, a fictional depiction of the Iranian nation in the second half of the 20th century. She has also translated one of the major works of Mahmoud, which I recently talked about, The Neighbors. Professor Kherad has also published a book of memoirs, which is titled In the House of My Bibi, Growing Up in Revolutionary Iran. In this conversation, I will ask her a little bit about her scholarship, her thoughts on literature and translation, and other related topics. First of all, thank you very much, Professor Kherad, for joining me.
Oh, absolutely. The pleasure is all mine. Thank you for inviting me
My pleasure.
With a warm greeting to your audience as well.
Thank you. So let's begin generally with books and reading. How would you describe the place of books and reading in your life? And how did reading become a serious, important part of your life?
Absolutely. You know, I grew up with my grandma, and my grandma was illiterate. She could not read and write. But if you were to give her the book of poetry of Hafiz, and then you would just read the first stanza, she would be reading the whole entire poem of that page and the next page and all that by heart. And I think that she instilled the love of books and reading and writing and all that from very early on. She was a storyteller. You know, I would wake up with her stories. I would go to bed with her stories. And books were so precious to her, although she could not read and write. And once I became at an age like maybe around 6 or 7 years old that I was able to read, the role has changed. And I started actually reading to her. And it was amazing. Like, you know, suddenly I was reading all these fantastic books. And of course, for me, literature started at a very heavy literature, you know, like, you know, I didn't have access to children's stories or books like that. You know, as soon as I went to the library, I started, you know, borrowing books of Mark Twain's and Hemingway. And I was reading all those things with such a passion and such desire. And I was also reading that to my grandma. And I felt like, you know, it was just like opening a brand new window to a different world, that it was like, you know, connecting both my mom, my grandma and I, and then like, you know, to the world outside. So it was mesmerizing. And I remember when I was very, very little, when I was like, let's say, walking with my grandma, and suddenly I would see a bus with the words on it, you know, and I was just spelling those words to me, and it felt like candy, believe it or not. It felt like words felt candy to me. And I remember my grandma would always say that human beings sang before they talk and dance before they walk, and which is true in any culture. And you look at any children, they start to dance before they walk, and they start to sing, you know, before they talk. And so this is, I think that the love of books became like that. And later on, my brothers, I grew up with older brothers, and which books was part of their life. You know, books were always thrown in our, you know, in our living room, and everywhere you go, there were books and magazines of all kind of genres. And then before I knew it, my brothers were reading, so to say, forbidden books, you know, books that they were not allowed. And they were reading it in hiding. They were reading it, like, let's say, in their own rooms. And as soon as I would walk in, they would close. And so I became super curious about, like, what kind of books are they reading that I'm not allowed to peek through? And actually, this is how it started with The Neighbors, you know. I've noticed that they are reading certain books that it doesn't have cover. You know, I couldn't tell the titles, you know, I couldn't tell who's been written by. And I always noticed that they are reading it hush hush, you know, like, and they're just like sort of stuck in it under their bed and everything. And this is how I actually got to see The Neighbors. You know, one day when no one was home, I tiptoed into my brother's room and I actually picked up that book, and I had no idea what was the title because the title page was gone. And I was starting reading it. And of course, like, as you know, the book starts with the sound of crying Bulur Khanum, this woman who's being beaten by, her husband. And I think that I'm not sure exactly how old I was. Maybe I was 8 or 9. And to me, it was so jarring, that scene, that beginning scene. And I started reading and reading, and I completely forgot that I'm just by myself reading it. And suddenly, boom, my brothers are coming in, and they're just like, "What are you doing?" And they're yelling and screaming. They're grabbing the book out of my hand. So it just stuck with me that somehow I have to read this book.
Mm-hmm.
Even though they are telling me, and it was just like, I was very surprised because they were always like encouraging me to read. My brothers actually took me to the library. They were the one that they actually started, getting me like the library card, and suddenly like they're telling me, no, you cannot read this one, you cannot read that one. So I was very curious, and this is how I remember I read the entire book of The Neighbors, maybe not understanding it completely, what was the story and what was happening. They were just like scenes that stuck with me.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember later on when I was a bit older, I started reading a lot of the, Persian, the profound literature, especially like, Ahmed Mahmoud's books and Subashun and all those books. And then I believe I was maybe 15 when I reread it. And to me, it was just like mesmerizing how powerful this author is, and how women are actually the center of all his stories, and something that many people don't pay attention, many critics, many scholars don't pay attention, that the sense of injustice that he's capturing in his books, the sense of injustice towards women, and how he actually gives so much voice to his female characters. And it's not just in The Neighbors. If you continue reading, like, let's say, the tale of a story, the tale of a town, or Dastani Yek Shahr, or some other books that follows The Neighbors, female characters are so powerful. The voices are so powerful. The sense of injustice so powerful. So this is how I started it. And then later on, when I started with my PhD in the Middle Eastern studies, I spoke to my advisor, and I actually, initially, I wanted to work on the work of women exile writers.
Mm-hmm.
This was the topic I had in mind. I wasn't even thinking about writing Ahmed Mahmoud. But then again, I looked around and I noticed that the work of exilic authors is being pretty much, done by many scholars, by many Persian scholars, and even like, Americans and non-American scholars. And I felt that there is a void, on Ahmed Mahmoud's and his generation work.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like maybe I should look at it again. So I started reading like all his books again. And then I found that, oh my gosh, that's even more than I thought when I was 7, or when I was 16, when I was 20. So now again, so I decided that I actually need to start my dissertation on Ahmed Mahmoud and his work. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Did you, I'm just curious, did you identify with him and his work, like personally, on a personal, because I know that you were you also were born in Khuzestan, same region.
Yes, that's a
South.
very good question. Yes, I was born in Abadan. I don't remember much actually about the city because, I grew up in Shiraz. But Khuzestan was always part of my life. So my older brothers could identify with their upbringing in Khuzestan. Even their accent is very much, even to this day, their accent is still very much Abadani accent, the southern part. I lost that one. I never got that one. And to me, it felt like, this is a generational writing and generational love affair with literature through my brothers, And so the more I would listen to them about their upbringing, about the city, about the type of freedom that they had, about the even like the sense of weather, the humidity, that they were always talking about. I was very curious about that. And the more I read Ahmed Mahmoud and I understood that how my brothers felt, So I wondered, yes, maybe that's actually that's a very good question. I think that for me was also a sense of reconnecting with my own past, a sense of reconnecting with the geography that I didn't know, because, the war happened, and pretty much, like I grew up in Shiraz. My brothers had a understanding of the past of like Abadan and the whole entire region, and I didn't. So I felt like, by looking into Ahmad Mahmoud's work, I would also be reconnected with my birthplace. And so yeah, that's actually a very good question.
Thank you. So I'm curious also about your work of translation, because you were doing a research, you were officially doing a kind of maybe cultural literary research on the
Yes.
significance of the works of Ahmad Mahmoud, and then you ended up translating one of his works.
I think I always wanted to translate this book, to be honest, even before I started my PhD. And I remember when one of Mahmoud's colleague, who is a director, his name is like, I'm completely missing his name, but anyway, he's done a great documentary on Ahmad Mahmoud's life and work. And it was shown at UCLA. And when I saw that, I was actually in master's program at the time. And when I noticed that, when he talked about Mahmoud, he spoke with such a passion, such desire, and I was actually very curious. So I actually walked up to him and said, how do you feel if I ever want to translate them, the neighbors? How would I be able to reach out to his family? Because Mahmoud was already passed away. I would like to get the permission. He told me that this book has been already translated in Russian long time ago. But then he told me, gosh, that would be an honor if you or anyone would translate that, and I will be able to actually get you in touch with his family, and I'm sure that his family will give you the permission to do so. So the sense of curiosity started then, but somehow I started it a little bit, like translating, but life always takes over. But then once I was in the PhD and I was working on it, I said, you know what, I felt like it was such an injustice to this book, because under the Shah regime, this book was one of the most read book, but it was in publication only 3 months. It was on the shelves only for 3 months, and it was pulled down because they associated the book with the Marxism and communist movement and all those things. Then again, after revolution, of course, by then Mahmoud was a very, very accomplished and very well-known author. And many of his books were able to actually see the lights on the shelves, except The Neighbors. And part of that was this time they accused him that the book is too sensual and is too sexual, and all these images, especially the image of Bulur Khanum, has to be removed. And of course, he didn't agree to that. I believe Mahmoud belonged to a generation of the authors that did not believe in self-censor. And he never wanted to censor his work, and especially this very important character, Bulur Khanum. And I'm so glad that he didn't censor that and let that fabricated, watered down version of Neighbors to be published. And I believe many scholars, even many Persian critics and scholars, still to this day don't understand, the importance of Bulur Khanum in The Neighbor, and as well as the other books following, with other female characters, how important it is that a writer, an author in the 50s, this is, we're talking about, this is not in the modern time. This is a good 70 years ago, that a man, an author of, these are authors of, they're product of their generation, so to say, but they still decided to start his book with the sound of a woman being beaten by her husband. And not just that, she will have an affair with a very young boy, an adolescent. Yeah, it's just like, I felt like, I'm so glad that he didn't, did that self censorship.
Mhm.
And I wanted it to translate this book because I felt like, look, a good 60 years of, both under Shah regime and under the current regime was not allowing this book to see the lights, you know? And
Mhm.
I was like, why not just like, translate it at least in English? So no one is gonna, forbade that. So let me just like at least do this. This is the least I can do for Mahmoud. And since I wasn't part of that generation, I think that I was able to look at it from sort of a neutral stance because many of the people that they are belonging to his generation, either they have so much attachment that they love it so much that they could not see even the criticism towards it, or they would just see it from what angle, like, this is it, this is a book of communist movement, or this is a socialist book. It wasn't any of those things. I think it was much more than that. Even to this day, I think that I have to go back and reread it to actually find out what is offering to this generation, to this
Mhm.
young generation. Because in order to understand who we are and what we are, we should always review the past and our history from this particular area, the southern part of Iran, the big, huge movement with nationalization of oil industry, the whole entire movement is so important. I think that our young generation should also start reading it to understand what is the whole entire story is.
Mhm. There might be, for some readers who are less experienced, there might be this initial prejudice against reading books that belong to maybe a couple generations before us. I had a discussion recently with a few friends. One of the people in our small group said, "Oh, the time has passed for reading." He mentioned Sadeh Hidayat. He said,
Mhm.
Hidayat is not from this world anymore. He would probably say similar things about Mahmoud, but actually, the justification for reading is not about returning to a past. It is about reviving our relationship to our present with the help of these authors. And I get that sense from your descriptions too. Would you? Uh,
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I would say that I sort of agree with that comment of your friend, because I think that writing is generational.
mm,
It's like a stage. It is true. Like I remember, I loved reading Mark Twain almost like uh, every year. Huckleberry Finn to this day is so refreshing to me, and every time I read it, I just see it differently. But
mm,
at the same time, I understand that this generation is completely looking for something else. um, I think reading is a generation. Like language is an evolving thing. It's like a tree that it just the branches is starting to grow in different directions, and language is
mhm.
like that too. I don't ever criticize those people with that kind of comments. I actually give them the right to think like that. But
Sure.
at the same time, I feel like because of our misunderstood literature and background, we didn't have that kind of freedom to really delve into the past. And because every time that we are starting to read the past, we are being titled or just like labeled that, oh, this person is communist and reading communist
Mhm.
books, then this person is just attracting to the socialism. So we don't have that kind of freedom, so to say. So to me, if you take all these labels away and just allow people to just read books as it is books, like fiction, work of just a storyteller. To be honest, I feel like Mahmoud was much more of a storyteller than a generational writer, and he has said it himself a zillion times, like in his interviews, in his writings. He always mentioned that I was 18 years old and I was part of a movement, and this was it wasn't the movement, it was, that it was engulfing Iran. It was something that it was engulfing the whole entire word, like from Latin American country, from Egypt, from Africa, and all that. So, and he was a generation, he was part of that generation, and he actually like responded to that movement. But this was maybe like 5 years of his life, But one of the reason I actually wrote about Ahmad Mahmoud's work, so so the neighbors started with Khalid, right? I mean, just the name itself, because Khalid is an Arabic name. It's not representing a Persian culture, so to say. It represents a big, huge part of Khuzestan, the Arabic-speaking population. Khalid is a 14, 15-year-old adolescent that starts with the story of the neighbors. But if you follow Khalid in this 50 years of Ahmad production, you'll see Khalid continuing. Khalid starts with an adolescent, and then it becomes a rebellious young adult. Then it becomes a young man, and it becomes a middle-aged man, and then it becomes an old man. 50 years, it continues, and his name even comes back. Sometimes as the main character, sometimes as the brother of main characters, and everything. So Khalid is a nation. Khalid is not just a character. It's the nation, it's Iranian nation, that it starts like, right after the industrialization of oil industry, nationalization of oil industry. So Iran is in that adolescent stage, and it continues all the way, even post the Islamic Revolution, and I believe 10 years after that, when Ahmad Mahmoud died. So it's 55 years of a nation growing from that adolescent to a middle-aged man, which is both Ahmad Mahmoud and the nation. So I love this parallel. I love how Ahmad Mahmoud is not just talking about himself as an author, but it's not even talking about a character, but this character coming back is just the nation, is the Iran itself. So to me, it's so important to read it as such, and then once you understand that, you understand your own history, you understand the history of nationalization of oil industry and the struggle, and so many parties coming out of this genre, so many difficulties and dilemmas and all that. So yeah, I mean, if you look at it this way, I think that with the freedom, not having that lens that let me just focus on it and read it from a point of view of a communist movement or socialism. And I think that he was a spectacular storyteller. He was very much dedicated to that part of geography of Iran. Although Mahmoud wrote Hamsayeha when he was in Ahvaz, in his birthplace, but the rest of his writing, all that production is actually away from Khuzestan. He is sitting in Tehran and he is writing about his birthplace. Just like you and I are, living in the exile, here we live in I live in the US, you live in Toronto, and we are writing and we are talking about our literature of home, homeland. So I think that that's very important. I really hope that, our younger generation will also take a look at these books. Maybe they will also offer their own understanding of the book and the stories.
And you talked about the importance, the significance, continuing significance of Mahmoud. And to me, that's even greater because of his refusal to censor, to self-censor. Because not censoring is about accepting complexity. For example, the character of Bulur Khanum, yes, she was beaten, but she was not just a weak woman being beaten. She was also, she had her own strength. And she had she was very supportive in certain relationships. And the story is not just about a socialist movement, and Mahmoud himself cannot be reduced to a proponent of socialism or communism in Iran.
Absolutely.
And that, I would say, I would agree with you about that continuing relevance. And a big part of it is that complexity, the irreducible complexity to ideology or to, simple features of characters.
Absolutely. And I when I was doing my dissertation, so I was reading so much about Mahmoud and then his direct work and even the interview and everything that he has offered, that trying really so hard to make a point of this or to correct this understanding of his works, that, you know, hey, I'm not like I said, what I wrote in the neighbors, it was just part of the history, part of my work. But look at all the other work that I have done.
Mm.
Like for instance, the critics of his work, they were always criticizing for lack of solid editorial in his work.
Mm.
Like even for instance, the neighbors, because Mahmoud belonged to not just regionalism, but also I think that I wouldn't say that this topic is correct or not. Magic realism, which Mahmoud doesn't really belong to magic realism. I think it's realism, you know. So Mahmoud believed that life is messy.
Mm-hmm.
So the life of the character should also reflect the real life. So he didn't believe that a work has to be polished and has to be refined, because the characters, especially like, you know, the average common characters cannot produce that kind of like, you know, refined language. So he left it at that. And many of his friends and his editorial critics mentioned that he should be polishing his work more often. He should be actually like submitting his work for editorial. Maybe he didn't have that opportunity in the neighbors, but he could do that for the rest. But he refused to do that. He said, I would like to have that freedom, that my characters will be also messy. And then going back to your initial question about translation, that was actually a struggle for me, you know, the translation. I wanted it to be as true as possible to the original work, and I did not want to compromise. I actually wanted to keep the integrity of the work, and it was very, very difficult. Here he's writing in the most beautiful Southern accent. Actually, you could hear the accent if you read the original translation. He even had the footnote, because some of the words that he used is not understood by non-Southern Iranian, you know, like, so that was already an issue to begin with. I mean, work of translation by itself, it's like opening a can of worms, you know. How would you translate? How would you be really true to the, to the original work? And when I started translating, and I was constantly speaking to my advisor, I really want to keep the integrity of the work. And then I had to talk to the editor, and the editor, of course, an American editor at the University of Texas. She couldn't, she was like, you know, it's not important at this point that every point of cultural references will be translated in this book, because we are writing for academic audience, and our academic audience are English, reader. So if anyone who is Persian speakers are going to actually get the original one and then read it in Persian. So it was really a dilemma for me. And I was so afraid that, you know, if I'm going to lose that colorful regional, the flavor of the region that Mahmoud has captured so beautifully in the neighbors. And I know I somehow I'm going to have to compromise, you know, and I have a feeling that we lost some of that, you know, but there was no other way around it. It was so, I mean, like, his work is full of imagery and full of beautiful, languages and everything, that it's so difficult to capture it, to be honest, because then it would, if I had to keep that flavorful language, it might actually sound kind of like funny to the English readers, you know?
Yeah.
So we just had to compromise, and it was just a back and forth type of a dilemma with me, with my advisor, and the editor. And then eventually we decided, well, somehow we have to lose some of that in order to keep. But it's something that I did not want to compromise. It was it was the essence, the feelings, and the emotion that Mahmoud was, or the message of Mahmoud in the book. I was not going to compromise on that. And I was very much clear about that with the editor, that please, like, I understand this is an American way of polishing the work as much as possible, but let's just, like, keep the essence of that as true as possible. So I hope that I have captured it. And I know that it's very difficult.
No, I really like the prose of your translation. It's very readable, and readability, I think, is really the main factor when introducing this kind of work to an English speaking readership. I love what you were talking about, the style of the work, and one of the features that I absolutely love, and Mahmoud uses it a lot, is the flashbacks. Like the narrator is going through an experience, and in a completely seamless way, we hear fragments of a previous conversation that he had some, and without much work, he very clearly says that these are flashbacks. He just repeats the line from a previous conversation without saying, oh yeah, and he remembered at that point, he remembered the conversation. No, he doesn't do any of
he
that.
doesn't make the transitions.
Yeah, he just
and actually this
patchwork.
Yes, and I'm so glad you mentioned that. I'm actually so glad that you have seen it as such, as a style, and it was his style. But that was a big, huge criticism towards his work. Did you know that?
Wow, no, I didn't know that.
Yes, actually, almost every literary criticism that they had, they don't see it as a style. They actually see that Mahmoud suddenly and randomly, talking about like those things, and then there's no connection. Some of it is justified, I would say, and some is not. And actually, Mahmoud has referred to it as two different reasons. One is it was just style, the regionalism. And I think that Emil Zola did that in some of the Russian, he read a lot of Russian literature. And he was also, before becoming an author, he wanted it to become a movie director. So that's why he has all these cinematic themes, in mind. And when he writes, and of course, like at that time, he didn't have technology was not on his side, because we have such vast exposure to technology and everything. He didn't have that in his time, in the 50s or in the 60s when he wrote. But then, so the whole entire theme, like let's say the house itself, which is a big, huge house with tons of rooms, and every room is one neighbor is residing, and all these neighbors are different type of people. One of them is a bit, more well off, one of them is much poorer, and all those things. So, but if you look at this, the whole entire thing is so cinematic. It starts, just imagine like a zoom. So it's the story starts with the house itself. And then the house expands to the neighborhood, and then expands to the tiny little bit of a city, and then the city gets bigger and bigger, and then it becomes the nation, it becomes the country, and then it becomes the world. It's very cinematic. This is the way that he has written not just this book, almost like I would say every books that I have read about Mahmoud, it's very cinematic. And then that form, maybe it was new to him, maybe he just didn't know how to craft it at the time. I don't know. And he mentioned that a couple of times, that once it was just a matter of choice. That was the style. He wanted it to describe a very chaotic, messy type of characters and situation as it is life, just like that. Two, he said that he did not have that kind of privilege of having an editor or having a group of people that they could read and then provide their feedback and everything, because the story started technically for a magazine. It was a weekly writing, and then that he had to offer it to the local magazine, and then it just later on, it became like a solid story as the book, The Neighbors. And it was a very difficult time for people, or for even like, mind, like let's say a clique or a group of literary work to get together and read, because if everything was under censorship and under scrutiny of the time. So he said that we didn't have that kind of privilege or opportunity that we have today as a literary group to get together and read each other's works and then provide feedback. So half of that he said, well, I mean, it's justified. I wish I had access to more editorial, then my work would not be as redundant, or my work would not be as, or be more polished. And then the other 50% was a matter of choice. But even after Revolution, when he had the opportunity to edit The Neighbors, because some of his critics told him that, hey, let's just work on it, and he told all the literary group at the time that this work is already done. It is what it is. It's been read by thousands and thousands of people. It has gone from hand to hand, and it has done its course, so to say, for that time. Now I need to put my time and my energy into my new work. And he continued, and it seems like his work, as he progressed, it gets a bit more polished. And he allowed like some of his friends, some of his close friends, to actually read his books and offer more feedback. But it is what it is. I mean, like sometimes I read Emma Zola's books and some other Russian authors, and I feel that messiness, or that the messiness is something that Ahmad talks about, actually. That sense of unpolished work is there, and they believe that it's supposed to be like that.
I'm very fond of that, and it's something that I've detected. I remember one other Iranian writer who has that in an even more intense way, and that's Shahriyar Mandanipur.
Yes.
I think I don't know about it, but I would guess that he was influenced by Mahmoud, among other people. But I don't know.
I wouldn't be surprised, because I think that Mahmoud has inspired many of the authors of generation after him.
Would you be interested in translating any other works by him or other contemporary writers?
Yes, I'm halfway through the Dastan-e-Yek Shahr.
Oh, wow.
Yes, and I have started it a couple of years ago, and unfortunately, I teach full time, and I have become teaching machine. Most of my time goes to teaching and curriculum development and all those things. And by the time, and I have a family, and by the time I come home, how much time can you really put in? And beside that, I have 2 novels that I would like to actually sit down and finish them. Those are my own, and it's a work in progress. And sometimes I just go back and forth. I love to translate. Translation is really, to me, is like so interesting to actually go into the mindset of the author, especially Mahmoud. The way that he is capturing all these characters in the city, and especially it's the southern part of Iran. To me, that's the most important part of Ahmad's work. That especially Dastan-e-Yek Shahr, it happened to be in Bandar Lenge, and where most of Exodus happened in the 1920s after the unveiling, by Reza Shah. And I feel like it's such an important book. And it's the tempo is much slower than The Neighbors, but it's still is like by his choice, because he was exiled 2 years in Bandar Lenge. So it's very slow. If you are a fan of slow, type of a writing, that's a good book to read. But to me, it's like so many characters are in there. I can't believe it. I'm just like, how did you come up with all these characters? But of course, it's part of his life, because it's also semi-biographical. He has lived it, and then he gets a lot of his inspiration from his own stories. So I'm halfway through it, but I'm hoping that I will be able to finish it, unless someone else will just jump in and finish it. I don't know, but I'm hoping that I will be able to finish it and then get a publisher who could take the book under their, you know,
Sure. Under
their
their wing.
wing.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I'm very excited to hear that you're
yes.
translating the sequel, so continuing it's considered the sequel to The Neighbor.
Yes, it is. It's happening right after he's been exiled to this very remote area in the southern part of Iran, which is close to Bushehr.
Mhm, mhm. Now we are talking about translation, which involves two languages. Something else I
Yes.
wanted to ask you about was uh, living with two languages and
Mhm.
your experience with both English and Persian or Farsi.
Right.
How is communicating in these two languages different for you? Do you find that they have different effects, different impacts, different things could be said more easily uh, in each one of the two? Do they play
Yeah.
different roles in your life? Like for me, English is the medium where I can think more clearly in it,
Okay.
but I
Yeah.
feel more intensely in Persian. I don't know
So
how it
true.
is for you.
It is true. Persian is very, for me too. Persian is a very flowery language. It's also very emotional language. I think it's like East and West, so to say, you know.
Mhm,
For me, it's English is a medium, exactly what you said, you know, like I feel like much more free when I'm in English. You know, I like the directness of English,
mhm,
you know,
mhm,
not beating around the bushes and all that, you know. It's also very logical. I think that English is very logical for me. Like for instance, when I started writing my memoir, I was struggling with it when I was writing in Persian. The language was so intimate to me,
mhm,
and as soon as I would start writing, I started crying, and it wasn't allowing me, and I wanted it to actually write it as flowery and as beautiful as it was, you know, and I couldn't. But as soon as
mhm,
I started writing it in English, it allowed me to step out of it, as if like I am not the person who's the main character of the of this book, you know, of this story. um, I think that the objectiveness is like, you know, changes somehow. Um, even like in my life, for instance, like in my career and everything, like, you know, I work with sometimes with, you know, Persian speaking colleagues and then English speaking colleagues. I feel like I always have to tiptoe around my Persian colleagues, you know. I need to be much more courteous and much more, um, if I have to ask, like, let's say requests, you know, I have to go around, you know, like, you know,
mhm,
so I'm not comfortable with that, to be honest.
mhm,
I'm not, you know, I was born and raised in Iran, but I was pretty much all my adulthood has been outside the homeland. I actually moved to Germany first, and you know, German is another, you know, cup of tea, you know, like it's
oh,
very, very direct language. And I actually loved it. I learned German much quicker than English, and I had hardly no accent. It was just like so amazing to me, that language, that it was just I didn't have to use a simile, and I didn't have to use all these, like, you know, بفرما بشین, you know, like all those things. It was amazing to me that you know, it gave me such a freedom to use it, and that's
mhm,
why I was so fluent in it. And then you know, English, it's not as German, but still, I think that it just gives you so much freedom to think free, to express yourself free. I think when it comes to Persian, it's good when not prose but poetry.
mhm,
When you want to be emotional, when you want to like really express emotions and all that, I have my son is 11 years old. When I want to speak to him, you know, like very motherly, so to say, suddenly Persian comes through, as is you know, so
mhm,
but I can't do that in English, you know.
mhm,
So yeah, I mean, but for me, writing, reading and all that, English definitely gives me so much freedom.
mhm.
But not to say that I'm undermining Persian, but you know, like every time I go back and reading Subashun, you know, it's just such a beautiful feeling, because I think that it would be nice to use both. You know, I think actually we are so privileged, you know, like uh, the more you know the languages, the more privileged you should feel,
Mhm.
that you could actually feel on one hand, that emotional part of the language, and then and on the other hand, you could feel the logical and the creativity of it. I think that both languages are beautiful, but
Yes.
I think it seems to me English is more practical for me. I don't know, as a writer, as a
Hmm.
reader.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, very interesting. Very interesting. As I was listening to you, something else occurred to me. With English, I am completely able to manage relationships of different degrees of intimacy. So
Yes.
it's easier to draw different kinds of boundaries with English. But with Persian, maybe this is my limited ability with Persian. Maybe I could be better. But I'm most comfortable when there's already an existing intimacy and trust, and I'm already comfortable with someone, then I can
Yes.
use Persian. If I need to draw boundaries, it's difficult to draw it with Persian. I don't know why. Because
And
it already is charged with a kind of intimacy and
no, you're
warmth.
absolutely right. I think I relate to that. I totally relate to that, what you're saying. Because I mean, look at our beautiful poetry, for instance, Hafiz, Sa'di, every one of them. Well, first of all, just open the book of poetry of Hafiz or Sa'di, just the beginning, like, a good, like Sa'di, 5 pages of dedication, like, to
Yeah.
so and so and so and so. And we are so used to, we're like, direct criticism does not exist for us, for the Persian speakers. If we are going to, like, even like offer constructive criticism, we have to be so careful, and it's time consuming, to be honest. It's just
Yeah.
like so time consuming, because we have learned, like, I mean, like, let's say, in a general public, for instance, if someone is not doing something correctly, you don't really say it directly to them. You just start reading a poetry,
Yeah.
because you use like a third, person, or you start saying like anecdote,
Hmm. Hmm.
the whole entire anecdote is like this. So and I think that maybe it's very cultural. I think it's a
Hmm.
very cultural, but part of it is because our culture is so polite, and that politeness is kind of like juxtaposition with the direct criticism. So whereas in English, it's actually good to be, like direct. It's a positive, and
Hmm.
it's a really good thing. And I
Yeah.
remember like a few months ago, even at work, I believe, I don't know exact details of it, but like, let's say if you have an English speaking colleague, you could just say, oh, I'm sorry, I need, if it's possible, I need to take care of this. If you don't mind, you just do this for me. You're comfortable to ask that. I need to just, like, I need to have this done by so and so. And no one
Hmm.
is, like, being offended by it. And then I mentioned the same language that I had, to another, Persian speaking colleague. Wow, he
Totally
completely,
different.
as if I am demanding, or I'm just like, I'm disrespectful and everything. And I couldn't even like imagine how she thought of it. And to me, it was just, I had to always remind myself,
Hmm.
I seriously, I have to remind myself just to be mindful of my, Persian speaking colleagues, or people that I'm in a relationship with. And that's to me a bit, it puts a bit of a distance between me and them. I'm always like, careful, like, what I'm saying or what I'm doing. Whereas the rest of the population, like, okay, they misunderstood it. Okay, we will just go and then speak like the next day, and then everything is fine.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of it, I think, is cultural. Part of it is also the language itself, that it has the limitations.
Hmm.
When it comes to logic, we're not logical people. We are very much emotional. I think it's just the Eastern society,
Hmm.
and I have seen it not just as Persian. I have seen it, in the Arab speaking population, even in the Asian population. Believe it or not, like, I came across a colleague who is Korean, And we were talking about these cultural norm and abnormality. And then she was just saying the same thing as you and I are speaking. And she was, she has left here for quite some times. And she said, I have such a difficult time with my people who are new to the States, because of they're not understanding this medium of language that is so direct. So yeah, I mean, it's just a language. I think that it has limitations on its own as well.
Yeah, yeah.
But the younger generation, I'm not sure if you have seen the younger Iranian generation are so direct.
Oh, that's good. That's good to hear.
Jarringly direct.
Jarring.
I think, yes, I think that they have taken completely a different approach to language.
That's good. Yeah, that's good. That's good to know. And they need to.
It's a bit.
The pendulum needs to swing.
Yes, I think in a way it's a bit. Sometimes I feel like it's a bit too much.
Okay. Overcorrecting.
To the point of they're very rebellious, and their language is also very rebellious. Like you look at all the movies that we watched. I mean, like all the new movies or all the social media, those clips, the TikTok, everything. It's just like, in a way, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's just, I wish I had their courage, because like, for instance, bad words. To this day, I cannot say any profanities in Persian to this day. I have to switch to English.
Yeah.
And then I see them that they are just like, wow, and sometimes I feel like, oh, I wish I had their courage,
Yeah, to use all of the resources of the language that they have. Yeah, for us, it was like a kind of taboo. We took the taboo seriously. Yeah. So you said that you were kind of a teaching machine these days, but it seems like you're not, because machines are automated and very efficient, and they don't need to think about what they're doing. But it seems like it requires a lot of effort. So a lot of your energy goes into teaching. Maybe would you like to say a few things about how, and if you had more time, what were your like scholarly preoccupations? What would you like to write about or do research on if you had more time?
Well, the reason I said that, I got my PhD in Persian literature. I know they call it Middle Eastern Studies, but Middle Eastern Studies is such a broad genre and I actually have such a difficult time with this, title, because I felt like, understanding Iranian literature is completely different than like, the whole entire Middle East. What is Middle East to begin with, where half of the population speaks Arabic and then some others. So I got my PhD in the Middle Eastern Studies, right? And I was hoping that I will be able to teach literature, poetry, and especially contemporary Iranian literature. I never got the chance to do that. As soon as I finished my PhD, I had to start teaching Persian language and culture. So I was okay with the content courses and culture and everything, but you start teaching Persian language, and that's very time consuming. As much as I love it, but the entire, Persian, when you are teaching languages, it's not just 1 hour or 3 hours of a week. You teach, and I teach intensive classes, sometimes 5-6 hours a day,
Wow.
teaching only language. Wow. And then curriculum development, and then again, grading and meeting with the, students. And it just, when I said teaching machine in terms of hours, it's super time consuming, and I am not doing anything that is close to my passion. Like, let's say, reading the kind of books that I like to read, talking about the kind of books that I like to talk about, doing translation. All the work that I have done was technically when I was in PhD program, and I had time on my own to do my dissertation, to do the translation, or even some other articles. And so, that's the reason I'm referring to myself as a teaching machine. If I were not to be teaching like that, I would have definitely loved to do more, maybe nourish my own writing. I have 2 novels that is one of them is I don't know, 50% into it, and then another one is 20%, and I just it's dusting there. And then
Mhm.
I have translated 50% of the Dastan-e Yek Shahr by Ahmad Mahmoud, but I haven't gotten the chance to go and then finish the rest. And so, yeah, I mean, teaching languages, it takes the best of you, I think.
Mhm.
And if I look back, I wish that, maybe I wouldn't have gone, that route. But um, these days, unfortunately, when it comes to Middle Eastern studies, it's all about funding, about the department, like everyone wants you to be just teaching languages,
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
unless there
Yes.
is just, and especially Persian, they don't give that much opportunity to the Persian studies. I mean, like it should be actually a department of Persian studies, not Middle Eastern studies.
Mhm.
I think
Mhm.
that they should definitely, I mean, actually, this is my humble opinion, that universities, should have, like, go back again to the way that it was supposed to be. Department of Persian Studies, Department of Iranian Studies, not Department of Middle Eastern. I mean, I'm not saying that it shouldn't be Department of Middle Eastern Studies, but I think that they should, allocate funding specifically for Iranian studies, because
Mhm.
under Iranian studies, then again, there is, like, Persian is very dominant language, literature and everything is a dominant language, but it would give so much freedom also, like, to the subdominant languages, such as, like, Kurdish and Turkish and all those things, because many of our authors, Iranian authors, are writing in Persian because they have so much audience, but if they had the opportunity, they could also write it in their own language and then have the broad audience.
Mhm. Yeah, it's so the label Middle Eastern Studies is more something that emerged out of bureaucratic necessities, to like an umbrella term to group a bunch of different kinds of studies together in to form a department. Is that right?
I think it's very problematic, to be honest.
Mhm.
I mean, I myself have a PhD in the Middle Eastern studies, but do I have the understanding of the entire Middle East? No.
Mm.
I mean, when I was teaching in Qatar and I was teaching in Gulf studies as well, I mean, Gulf studies by itself is like a big, huge genre.
Mhm.
Iranian studies, I understand. I think that Middle East, I'm not against Middle Eastern studies, but I think that the funding, the allocation of the funding should be specifically designed for the Persian studies, for
Mhm.
Iranian studies, so then people would start, like, like delving into the literature, poetry of Iran itself. Iran is a big, huge country. There are 22 languages spoken in the country. There are 22 ethnic groups. And I bet that there is just such a vast majority of, like, genre existing both in Iran and outside the homeland. So I think that that's just, like, the up to very powerful scholars and professors of Iranian studies that they would request that kind of funding
Yeah.
rather than putting everything under the umbrella of Middle Eastern studies, because I think it's just such a big and very broad term or terminology. And it obscures the Persian studies. It
Mhm.
obscures, like, the Iranian studies by
Mhm.
itself.
Mhm. Mhm. I know I've taken already so much of your time, but do you have time for one more question? One last?
Absolutely.
I,
Please go ahead.
so I assume now, and correct me if I'm wrong, that your field is in Iranian studies or Persian studies. For people who might be interested in getting into this field, maybe at an undergraduate or graduate level, uh, would you recommend maybe two or three entry level books for them to read to get familiar with, maybe specifically from a literary perspective into this field? Do you have those kinds of recommendations?
That's
Uh,
a
or
that's a
it's
tough
difficult? Yeah,
question.
yeah, sure.
um, If I were to recommend anyone, especially the younger generation, I would say that they should start reading contemporary literary genre, especially books produced by the young generation of Iranian authors. Not to undermine the Iranian outside the country. The exilic literature is also, like, very profound. Um, I just recently read the book. I could look up the title to mention, and I think that part of it is just because my students are very young, and my students are always reaching out to these, like the type of questions like, who are young Iranian, and what is it that they want? They're so curious about young generation of Iran. So I think that if I were to recommend any books, I would recommend books that is written in the past 20 years,
Mhm.
that is shed light on Iranian young generation movement. Like for instance, I read just like recently a book by Tara Kangaroo. It's called Heartbeat of Iran, which is not just the book by itself. It's like a real voices of a country and its people. And it, in this book, I mean, it's not a work of fiction. It's nonfiction. She has it's a series of interviews that various type of people in Iran, and I found it very fascinating that it's just not just one voice. My students read a lot of Marjane Satrapi, Persepolis, although it's not as brand new, but I feel like it kind of like shed lights on what has happened after after the 70s Iran, and then Iranian Revolution, and it just like, because it's a very fast pace,
Mhm.
and it just really in a nutshell tells the audience what has happened. And also another book that I really really like is Lipstick Jihad.
Wow.
um, Lipstick Jihad is actually by Azadeh, who actually like co-worked with the Shirin Abadi's books. She was born and raised here in California, and she decided to go to Iran and then look at Iranian people from inside. So uh, she has written many books, but I really like Lipstick Jihad very much.
Mhm.
Yeah, there are fantastic books. But especially I'm not unfortunately very familiar uh, with the series of the Persian writing books that it comes out, because we're all stuck with the books written by our generation. But I would say, like, the new books that is written by exilic writers, especially women, especially female writers, I think that I really recommend that, because they tend to be much more um, honest, and much more objective.
Mhm.
Maybe this would be a good word.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, I really recommend those type of
Mhm.
books.
Mhm. Speaking of which, I can't wait for our next interview, maybe after you publish one of your novels or your next translation
Oh my
in
gosh, that
in
would be
a
like a
yeah.
century.
Yeah, no. I
That would be
hope
another century.
for my own sake, I hope that it happens sooner than that.
I
But
really hope.
we can wait. But yeah, I hope that you find the time and energy and optimism to continue these projects. And I really look forward to our next conversation, both live
Absolutely.
on for the public and for our own. Yeah,
Absolutely.
I learned a
Well,
lot. Yeah, by
it,
finding you, I'm very happy that I found you through the translation of Mahmoud, and then your own research, your memoir that I look forward to reading, and yeah, in general.
And speaking of my memoir, well, thank you so much, first of all. It was really a pleasure speaking with you. But speaking of my memoir, that's another story. Um, the publisher took 100 pages out of this book without my permission,
Wow.
because remember you had that question about emotional language. What is language? Because they believe that 100 pages were very emotional,
Oh.
and it wasn't as I think that they wanted to portray a very dramatic, book. So any part of the book that it was a bit hard, like lighthearted, and like showing my mom as a funny character or something, they took it out, and of course
Mm.
it was without my permission,
Oh wow.
and that's another story. It was published, but I'm hoping that I will be able to actually republish in the
Mhm.
house of my BB. And I do have the translation rights from Norway and France, that I'm hoping that I will be able to actually like finish it in the original transcript that it was, and then I will send it for translation both in Norwegian and French. So these are the kind of things that I would like to do if I were not to be teaching as a teaching machine.
Okay. Great, great. So
Absolutely.
let's,
Well, thank you so very
yeah,
much
thank
for
you. Thank
the
you.
opportunity. I really appreciate it. And I
My
really
pleasure.
hope that Ahmad Mahmoud will continue to live through his stories.
Mhm, mhm. Thank you very much again. And let me stop the recording and then we can say our goodbye privately.
Absolutely.